Couple quick housekeeping items, and then let's go ahead and get going with some kind of quick introductions. First and foremost, kind of bear with me here today. I am getting over a cold, so today is the first day that I actually have my voice back. I actually had completely lost it last week, so doing much better. But bear with me here if I have to clear my throat or get some water. Number two is I do have the built-in chat pulled up, so. Typically my goal with these webinars is to save ample time at the end. We'll try to spend maybe 30 or so minutes on the actual webinar itself, and then tons of time for a question and comments. With that said, though, I do love to make these webinars as kind of interactive as possible. So if you have questions, comments, if you want to add any insights or feedback, by all means, do toss it in the chat, and we'll try to kind of incorporate them and answer them as we go. As well as again saving some time at the end for some question and answer. So with all that said, I'm going to kind of flip the switch a little bit. I'm going to start with a quick introduction of who I am and what we do here at Reviewer, and then I'll come back to kind of today's agenda because I think kind of talking a bit more about who we are and what we're doing kind of helps sets the stage for kind of why today's topic and how we got to this point. So, kind of a quick introduction. So, my name is Kyle. I'm the CEO here at Reviewer. Been doing this since day one. We know we started the company back in about 2012. I think what makes us very unique and kind of why we kind of got to this point is that we come from kind of your background, right? So when I say we've kind of walked a mile in your shoes, I really mean that. So we are part of the volunteer review committees for what I call funding opportunities. So scholarships, grants, investments, and things like that. And when I say a part of the volunteer committee, what I really mean is that we are part of the volunteer evaluators or judges or reviewers or whatever we want to call them. So we kind of lived firsthand kind of the two different experiences that went into running a scholarship. So, back in 2012, that experience looked like paper, right? So we literally had hundreds and hundreds of binders being mailed to our doorsteps. And as a volunteer, we were trying to carve out time on the weekends to read through these binders, leave our comments, leave our notes, and either mail it back or a lot of times we meet with other kind of board members and committee members on the weekends to kind of narrow down the results and award scholarships. We then kind of lived through that online transitionary period. And what that really meant, and this is where maybe a lot of you guys currently live, is we're using a lot of different kind of quote unquote web-based or online tools to facilitate scholarships, but none of them were intended for the task at hand. So, obviously built in submission forms and surveys, emails, spreadsheets, downloading of documents, online databases, Google Drive, Dropbox, you name it, more spreadsheets. Obviously, I can't reiterate that one enough. And for us as a volunteer, it actually kind of created more work for us than the physical paper, because at least with the paper, they were centralized. Now we're using like eight different tools that really weren't intended for the task at hand. And then two really terrible things started to pop up. So, number one was lost information. So a combination of either, submissions coming in through spreadsheets and emails and built-in web forms that were being downloaded and kind of recompiled and sent back to the review team with all of the attachments. Somewhere along that way, because of the manual nature of it, things were getting lost. Two, kind of in conjunction with that, is we actually saw applications, or we heard had applications go to spam filters. And so we had heard review committees actually had sat down, cut scholarship checks, and then months later found out that there were a handful of that case, deserving kids, right, that didn't even get included in the selection process. So as a mission-driven organization, like this just can't physically happen. And then number two, and this is one of the harder things to talk about, and I think this is whether or not people want to agree with it or realize it or not, is with the inability to redact personal identifying information, we saw very clear biases coming into the review process that was obviously bleeding into maybe not the most qualified candidates being selected because of some type of variable. So these were the experiences that led us to build Reviewer as an online platform, not just to run scholarships, but really any type of application review-based program. So awards, grants, scholarships, fellowships, board nominations, you name it. Obviously, today's main topic is scholarships. And so full circle, why we kind of came up with today's topic is I'm in this kind of fortunate position where I talk with, in a given year, thousands of organizations, both current clients and prospective clients, who are doing a wide variety of scholarships in different industries with different kind of unique use cases and needs and workflows and processes. And by now, I like to say that I've seen almost every imaginable workflow. And, I want to say there's no right or wrong way of running a scholarship, but there absolutely are wrong ways. There are just a whole lot of right ways to run them. And a lot of times in our implementation process, we'll take your current processes and workflows and load them into Reviewer. We might offer some best practices and insights on features that we have that would work really, really well for you. But at the same time, we really do love to kind of keep an eye on emerging trends and things that we're seeing within the space and hearing from other organizations and kind of give back to the community of ways to kind of stay adaptive and restructure how we run a scholarship. Again, we're all mission-driven organizations here. We have the same end goal, which is to impact people's lives. And so the more insights and feedback that we can offer, the better. So one of the common questions that comes up in a lot of conversations is, if we had to dream up like what does the ideal application review kind of process look like for a scholarship? What does that look like? And one of our clients, the Army Scholarship Foundation, in my opinion, has, I don't want to use the term a perfect scholarship workflow. That's why I kind of use quotes on this. But they have a really, really, really well-structured scholarship program that does a couple different things. So number one is the application process is structured in a way that we can identify the most qualified candidates while at the same time lowering the barrier for them, empowering them for success to fill out the forms. Number two is they've created this review and selection process that helps kind of avoid both potential biases, but also streamline the operations. And then from the actual selection perspective, kind of a combination of deliberation as well as kind of mathematic quantitative scoring to leverage data to make informed decisions off of it. Now, fast forwarding here to almost 2025, we're dealing with a whole new set of circumstances and things that we need to consider as scholarship providers. How are we dealing with personal and sensitive information? How are we storing the documents? Are you collecting things like social security numbers? I think we're all very well aware of some of the fiasco that went on with FAFSA this year. And so how do we kind of deal with the SAI, kind of calculator and those types of forms, all that kind of fun stuff. And so these are the things that I want to kind of preview for us today. By no means do I want to kind of show you, review, and kind of show you why this is the tool that you should utilize. The goal here today is to take these concepts and help kind of visualize them, obviously using Reviewer, but hopefully there's some type of takeaway or structure that you can implement within any of your programs. So with all that said, I do want to kind of jump into the very first topic today, which is the submission experience. I think the core kind of terminology there is experience, right? So the name of the game is that we absolutely need to lower the barrier for our scholarship applicants. I think we oftentimes overthink these campaigns, and we often think about like from an operations team, how do we streamline our own operations, which makes total sense, right? A lot of times, we're volunteering our own hours. There's other things that are going on within the day, and we think that we can kind of roll up our sleeves at 8 p.m. on a Wednesday and kind of do stuff. But you actually make up a very small fraction of the overarching program. Your applicants, your review committees, your nominations, your committees, they make them a much a bolder core component to the program. So how do we kind of think about it as an experience for them? And so, from an application perspective, you are presented with kind of a unique opportunity and challenge that not only do you have to lower the barrier and make them kind of empower the applicant to create the best version of themselves for funding, but also still collect the essential data that you need for both record keeping purposes from fund disbursement perspectives as well as making an informed selection off of it. And like I kind of alluded to a second ago, now we're dealing with things like social security numbers, IRS information, FAFSAs, personal identifying information. So how are we collecting that in a way that's both safe, secure? One of the kind of scary facts that we have heard is that there's a large number of scholarship applicants who are actually deterred away from opportunities because they don't have confidence in the systems and tools that they're applying to. They're going to submit their FAFSA information or their 1090s or 1040s, and they're wondering like, where's that going to go? Where's it going to live? What happens after the program wraps up? And so these are the things that I kind of want to talk through today. So the first thing I want to kind of look at is what are the core components as far as information to capture in a scholarship program. Again, at this point in time, the way that the grades are being coming up with now and people's, academic achievements, it feels like almost everybody gets extremely good grades. We also kind of get into things like financial need, and there's that kind of gray area of like, well, what is considered financial need and not, right? Is it people's income? Is it their expenses? All that kind of fun stuff. So the idea is to kind of build this application structure that kind of combines all the moving components that go into making an informed decision. So the things that we're going to kind of look at today is obviously like what are the personal information of the applicant for record keeping purposes, and then how do we help differentiate them from one candidate to the next? I think you do that by breaking it down into kind of bite-sized pieces. So like obviously what are their academics and what are their grades? What type of honors and extracurricular activities are they doing? What is the unique financial needs of that individual applicant in comparison to others. Again, tying in things like the IRS information as well as FAFSA. What are their career aspirations? How does it align with your mission and vision of your scholarship program? What are the funds actually going to be used for? What are their current expenses? And then probably the two things I get most excited about, which is both essay writing. So, giving the applicant a voice to differentiate themselves from one another through personal storytelling, and then external reference collection. Because again, what better way to get a pulse or a gauge on the uniqueness of that candidate than through somebody else's eyes? Now, again, with all that said, these create a tremendous amount of challenges, though, because there are so many moving parts to a scholarship. Now, we're talking about people, applications, file uploads, references. How on earth can you possibly manage those in a way that makes sense? So, this is where I want to kind of get into today's conversation. I'm actually going to show you what this would look like. I'm also going to kind of preview a concept that we've kind of really got pushed hard here at Reviewer, which is how to properly collect references. So, kind of at a high level, references can be very hard to write, right? Oftentimes the reference is being asked to the very, very last minute. They have to submit a full-blown letter, which either A means that they're not going to have the time or energy to put into it, which is very unfair to the applicant. Or B, they're going to leverage some type of existing template that they've used in the past, which makes it very not personalized. So how do you kind of eliminate the old school methodology of a reference letter and instead push them towards a reference template? So kind of guiding the reference through a series of questions, lowering the barrier for them. And then when you as a team kind of sit down to go through a review and selection, you're comparing apples to apples because every single scholarship applicant has kind of the same data points or reference quote unquote essays submitted about them as one another. So again, kind of threw a lot at you. I know it's all on my screen here. So if you're going to kind of take a screenshot, there's some good kind of nuggets here of things to incorporate. I will be sending as well a follow-up after this. So we're going to take all the things that we talk about today, convert it into like a blog, bite-sized pieces, as well as interactive tours that kind of showcase these components. That way you have it as well. But let's take a look at, in this example, again, what the Army Scholarship Foundation application submission workflow experience looks like. And again, hopefully there's some tidbits that you can kind of take. Now, I understand that this is kind of a unique scholarship in the sense that it's very targeted towards, active duty military as well as kind of National Guard members, families and their spouses. But the core components of what we're collecting about the applicants themselves is very translatable to virtually all scholarship programs. So again, I hate to say that this is the perfect scholarship application workflow because that's kind of a very bold statement, but I think it's as close to perfect as we can get. I think they do a really, really, really nice job. So within Reviewer, I would say the majority of the clients that we work with will start with their main websites, which makes total sense from a content perspective and from a branding perspective. Like your audience is going to go to your websites anyway, so we should probably start there. Dates, deadlines, criteria, all that kind of fun stuff. You should kind of mark it on your own page. And then from there, you're going to have a giant button. It doesn't get much bigger than this one, right? That says click here to apply. And that's what transitions them from your web presence to Reviewer. Now, again, where you send them is kind of up to you. Many of our clients will use what I call a microsite. So it's like a dedicated page that serves as a middleman between your website and us. Others will completely bypass that. It's a bit redundant because it's already on their website and they send them to a page like this. Now, I do want to kind of pause here again. My goal is not to kind of showcase and preview all that we have to offer at Reviewer, but this concept here called profiles is at its core an extremely powerful component that I think we need to be leveraging no matter what tools that you're using. The reason why I say that is, again, there are so many moving parts to a scholarship. You have on the front end people, their submission forms, which I say forms, which is plural because you might have like their initial scholarship application and then ongoing data forms and collections from them, like fund disbursement forms, letters, acceptance packets, all that kind of fun stuff. And then you get into like their file uploads and their deliverables, references. And then at some point, like I mentioned before, there's some type of built-in like judging and scoring process and communication. So you can't have all those elements siloed and living in separate places because all that typically means is that means you're downloading, you're exporting, you're recompiling, and it poses a significant compliance risk by having kind of processes that are disconnected or disjointed. So within a reviewer, the applicants create their profile, which on the front end of things already elevates their experience because that means they can save, they can log out, they can come back later, they can work at their own pace. If you want them to add additional deliverables to you or receive communication, they can do so. But then from your perspective, you actually get some pretty cool kind of conversion tracking and some metrics. So you can see in real time, like the number of people who have started your scholarship applications, where they're at in their journey. You can send them built-in reminder messages. That in itself oftentimes leads to about a 30% increase just in participation alone. So with all that said, here's kind of the bulk of the application form. And the first component that I want to kind of introduce here is qualifying questions, or what I call eligibility. Now, in this example, there are a series of questions that will basically say you're eligible or you're not. So as the applicant comes in, they answer a series of questions. If they're not eligible, the name of the game is to do two things. One is to not waste their time and energy applying for an opportunity that they're not eligible for. And B, it's allowing you and your team to not have to vet through absolutely everybody and kind of read through a bunch of applications just to at the end of the day say, hey, sorry, you're not eligible. So it does streamline a lot of the admin operations down the road. The other thing that I do love about that, though, and again, this is not necessarily happening within this example, but we have some of our clients that we work with that offer multiple scholarships, many, many, many scholarships. And a lot of them have very unique criteria and eligibility, which typically means that as an applicant, they don't even know what they're eligible for. So there's a lot of scholarships that are going unfunded or under applied for just because there's no awareness that it's even an option for a candidate. And so in that use case, you can actually build these really kind of quote unquote complex workflows. Don't worry, it's not complex in the sense of setting it up. It's complex in the sense of what it's trying to solve, where our system could say, hey, based on what you just submitted into the system, basically by saying, you have this certain grade point average, you want to go to this certain school, you want to pursue this certain career path. These are the 3 or 4 scholarships that we offer that you best align with. Which of or all of them do you want to apply for? So it's almost like a scholarship matching process that's integrated and baked right into the submission processes itself. So from here, the applicants again will move on. If they were qualified, then it drops them into the application. Now, again, this is where I want to kind of focus on the 5 or 6 kind of core components that I think make this scholarship application about as perfect as can be. So number one, from a record keeping purpose, we have to know who this scholarship applicant is, right? And so in this example, we're collecting personal information about them. You will see that in this use case, we are asking for a social security number. Generally speaking, we do need to be very, very careful with things like Soch, right? You'd be shocked at the number of built-in web forms that I see where people just input directly in their social security numbers, or downloadable PDFs and Word versions that they're filling out, and then they're emailing it back in. If you can walk away with one key takeaway, you physically cannot be transmitting these personal identifying applications, who they are, social security numbers, and file uploads through built-in web forms that are being downloaded and exported and sent in via email. They should never be transmitted that way. That in itself is going to get us in some serious compliance issues. So obviously a platform like Reviewer, and I don't know if all platforms like this, I doubt it, we have a SOC 2 Type 2 compliance, all the data gets encrypted. We have very unique ways of both collecting things like SOCH as well as things like FAFSAs, where you can control how it's being collected, who's going to have access to it. It can be password protected. And then on the back end, we have all the data security kind of policies in place to auto remove stuff to make sure that both you and the applicants are protected. So in this application process, the one thing I would like to see is what I call a proof of process, which is basically like a public statement that says, hey, look, in this case, Michael, the applicant, if you are going to apply to our scholarship, here's how we can ease your mind on how we're going to handle your confidential information, as well as here's how we can ensure that it's going to be a fair process by saying, here's the application questions, here's how you're going to go through a review, here's how we're going to do a selection. That way, at the end of the day, once you go to award scholarships, if, God forbid, somebody calls up and says, hey, I didn't get a scholarship, I don't agree with you, you have the proof of process in place to say, look, I totally understand. It's unfortunate, but you can kind of see from a full transparency perspective that you went through the exact process that we said you would. So that's not happening here. That is one component that I would like to see. So from here, we start to get into like the bulk of the application. Again, this is in its sense a very unique scholarship because it's targeted towards, again, veterans and active military. And so it's asking for information about who the parents are, as well as kind of proof of their active duty statement. So this may not be relevant to many of you. And then it gets into the application form. So again, this is where I think, again, these key components make this perfect. So number one is we have to know kind of what school they're currently going to and where they want to attend. We want to get into some of the academics. So I would do this by obviously targeting transcripts. So direct file uploads into Review, which I'll show you. And then again, on top of that, like what's your GPA, SAT, ACT, some of those components are going to change based off of the demographics of the applicants or what kind of where you're located. Again, here in the heart of the Midwest, SATs aren't very common. We focus more on the ACT. So, by all means, customize this to you, please. But it's trying to get a good pulse from a pure metric perspective. Like what is the academic achievement achievements of this applicant. Again, overarching, I like to place a little bit less of an emphasis on academics and more of an emphasis on, personal storytelling and differentiating factors, but we still need to collect this information. I do want to point out, and this is something that they're not doing, is you'll notice that they are going to be evaluating the applicant. And one of the components as far as the selection criteria is their academic achievements. So I would actually use automation here as well. So our system can actually read their GPA, their SAT, their ACT, all those things. And if you want to create like brackets, you can actually auto assign point values. So in this case, anybody who maybe scores between a 3.5 and a 4.0 gets a certain point value. Anybody that's between a 3.0 and a 3.5 gets a different point value. Anything under 3 gets a different one, right? So you're actually kind of already kind of building what I call like a leaderboard based off of these raw metrics that you're going to end up reviewing anyways in the future. But it takes the burden off of the review committee because they don't have to worry about reading it and kind of assigning points. It's happening on its own. The next thing we want to get into, again, is from a differentiation perspective, is what type of honors and achievements do they have, both scholastically as well as outside the classroom. Tell us more about your extracurricular activities, again, both in school and out of school. I think that's a critical core component that we have to kind of separate academics and school from their kind of personal lives and their journey. And so let the applicants tell you things that they're very proud of. I think just noting the things that they put in here will help build a kind of a narrative about their personality traits and kind of what their passions are and kind of what their values are. And then the last piece to that is things like employment. Again, are they working in school? Are they working over the summers? Where are they working? All that kind of fun stuff. From here, we start to get into the needs analysis. So again, this is phase 2. So we collected personal information as well as kind of their academic journey. Now we're collecting financial needs. This is, again, that gray area where you can kind of define like what is considered financial need, which is why I think you have to use your best discretion, as well as I do believe we should leverage FAFSA, SAI calculations as well. It helps kind of build a story that you're not in charge of. So in this example, we're asking the applicant, hey, where do you want to go to school? Are you going to be a full-time student or not? Tell us more about your career path. Like, what do you want to go to school for? Like, what's your aspirations? And then we get into things like expenses, right? So in this example, I have a made-up applicant who wants to attend Penn State. And it kind of talks about, hey, how are you going to pay for college in this case, right? So it's a combination of scholarships and grants as well as student loans. That in itself helps you also identify financial need. Are they have parental assistance? Is it already coming out of like a savings account, or are they self-funding absolutely everything through loans? That might tell a story as well about who's most deserving. And then at the end of the day, we have to be able to show impact and award it to the deserving people. So in this case, like, what are the funds going to be utilized for? Like, what are your anticipated expenses? From here, we get into income. So tell us more about, your combined family gross income, proof of income. So again, show us your IRS form 1040. In this example, we're asking for a direct upload from the FAFSA SAI. So that's the student aid index calculation. Again, leave that to kind of the experts, let them just fill it out and then come back into reviewer and then upload it. And then, of course, tell us more about any potential circumstances. So again, at this point in time, we've done a couple things. We have information about the applicant. We have information about their academic achievements. We know more about what they want to do with the funding if they were to receive funding, as well as what their financial needs are. And again, to continue to reiterate, on this page alone, we have two really kind of crucial points of confidential data, the FAFSA information as well as the 1040. So to continue to reiterate, if we're going to be collecting these deliverables, we have to make sure that they're being stored in a safe, secure environment. On top of that, I have started to see a trend where maybe we don't collect that information. We instead ask the applicant to answer a series of questions such as family income. And then as you narrow it down to like the top X number who are kind of the finalists for your scholarship, have them come back again, quote unquote, to their profile and then upload those documents. That way we're kind of lowering the risk by having that stored for less people. So from here, this is where we get into, again, my favorite components to a scholarship, which is the differentiation factors, which is the personal storytelling. So you can do a couple different things. I do love the idea behind a video essay. The challenge, however, even though it is a much more personalized experience, is that if you are going to be redacting data, which we highly recommend, you physically can't redact somebody's face right from a video. So if you are going to go video route, you should still incorporate some type of text-based essay. So again, for me, the essay prompts that I personally like is going to be more so, trying to align an essay prompt with the core mission and vision of your foundation or of your scholarship program. So you want the applicant to kind of describe to you a personal story that helps align their personality traits and their characteristics with you as an organization. From here, then we get deeper into things like reference requests. Now, I mentioned earlier on kind of the very unique way that we handle references within Reviewer. You can totally still do a file upload, but instead, what I would personally like to see is this kind of concept where the applicant puts in like the name and email of who is submitting the reference, and then it actually does trigger a notification. So both Steve and Paula will get some type of email that says, "Hey, so and so, you've been asked to write a reference on behalf of Kyle, or in this case, Michael. Click here to do so." And then again, that takes them to what I call a reference template, not a reference letter. So again, kind of jumping the gun a little bit, I do want to kind of show you what that would look like. So again, in this example, we put in the references information. Reference then gets an email notification with a link that says, click here to submit your reference. From there, they're brought to a page kind of like this. Now, as you can see here, you can absolutely still do a reference upload like a letter. But again, where I would personally like to see this is either one or the other or a combination of both, either some type of like ranking tool. So you're asking the reference to rank the applicant on, again, the core characteristics of your mission and vision, or like what are 1 to 3 very, very short essay prompts you want the reference to answer. So again, we're lowering the barrier for the reference by just simply coming into the dedicated tool. They just simply click on a link. They can save, they can log out, they can just answer a series of questions. And then once they're done, all of their information gets automatically attached back to the applicant's profile. So kind of foreshadowing, again, I want to show this to you is operationally speaking on your dashboards, it'll actually show you like how many outstanding reference requests there are, how many of them are in progress versus how many of them are completed. You can send built-in reminder messages. And then here's kind of previewing what that will look like. So I'm going to open, and we're going to come back to this more. I'm going to open Michael's scholarship profile, and you can see here I've got numerous references that were submitted. All I need to simply do is click the view button. And again, the content of that reference gets embedded directly on my scholarship applicant's profile. So there's no need to download, export, recompile. Everything gets kind of compiled in a nice, neat bow for us. So with that said, let's jump into the next topic, which I would argue is probably more important than anything we're going to talk about, which is creating fair, non-biased review workflows, as well as actually conducting a selection. So again, if you have any questions or comments, toss them into the chat. Again, I am going to send out like an interactive tour of this scholarship. So if you want to kind of look in more detail, the content and the questions being asked by the specific scholarship, by all means, go for it. But again, I do think it's structured in a really, really well mannered way. So number two, and we're going to kind of come back to this as far as accessing information goes. So from an operations perspective, I mentioned beforehand, we have to be very sensitive about how we're collecting file uploads and social security numbers and how we actually store it and manage it. So to kind of preview that a little bit, I did show you that dashboard a little bit. So you do kind of get these kind of dashboards that manage all the operations from one place. But to kind of help you visualize the profile concept, you basically get this menu system in Reviewer. Now, again, I do want to kind of showcase how we handle this in Reviewer. But if you think through like a traditional scholarship management workflow, again, you're collecting a bunch of spreadsheets, emails, downloading of documents, and you're trying to recompile things to send it out to the review committees. In Reviewer, everything gets kind of stored in one centralized menu. So you can sort and filter by submission statuses, by phases of review, by their categories. And all you need to simply do is open up the name of the scholarship applicant. And then there's that information that was filled out, right? So there's Michael. Here's the eligibility criteria. Here's all of Michael's personal information. You can see the social security number does not show up here. There's a separate way of accessing it if you ever need to from an encryption perspective. We have all of Michael's parents' information. You can see within here there are multiple file uploads. So we've got the DD-214, we have the transcript. If I keep scrolling down, you're also going to see that there's a FAFSA and a 1040. So all of the information that Michael submitted to us is now centralized in one hub. Better yet, how do we access this information? So if I jump up to the top, number one is I can actually one-to-one communicate with my scholarship applicants. It's possible that you want them to submit additional deliverables or updates. Maybe in this case, Michael is selected for a scholarship, and now he's going to kind of go off on a brand new journey where he needs to submit like fund disbursement forms. So you can communicate within the system. Maybe you want to leave internal notes either to yourselves or to your review team. You can do so. So in this example, it's a way for your team to collaborate, but Michael himself will never see that communication. And then what I really wanted to show you here was kind of two things. One is those file uploads. So again, multiple files here, and again, very, very, very personalized files. So your FAFSA, your 1040, and so they show up in this list. And all I need to do is press the view button, and you'll notice that those file uploads show up right in front of my page. So there's your headshot or your photo, your videos. If it was a video essay, would actually play in Reviewer. Here's your FAFSA SAI summary. Here's your 1040. Again, these are kind of dummy data, right, in PDF format. But you can see that it took all of our file uploads, put them into a table, and they all get embedded in Reviewer. That means that you never have to physically download and store that sensitive data on a personal machine. Again, number two is all those references or those transcripts. Again, I already kind of showed this to you, but it does get embedded right in front of us. So moving on to the review process. So again, this is where I can kind of do a whole separate webinar in more detail if we ever want to. But I would say it's the most critical component to a scholarship. And what I mean by that is you have to take all of your scholarship applications and review them to make some type of decision. But you need to do it in a way that A, is sensitive to your review team's time. Many of you are volunteer driven or board driven. So your team of evaluators, they're not hired full time to review scholarship applications. So how do you equip them with some type of infrastructure that they can allocate the time and energy that's required from them and the applicants deserve, while still making sure that you get kind of the right selections done? And it's easier said than done. What we found at reviewers, on average, most evaluators physically cannot review more than 15 scholarship applications. They can, but their energy levels drop off pretty dramatically, like a waterfall after 15, which means that if you were the 19th person that review team reviewed, are you going to get the same fair kind of time that number one got? Probably not. So with that said, how do you structure your scholarship review process in a way that makes sure that every applicant's getting reviewed, but also your review team isn't looking at 200 scholarship applications? And there's probably like 4 or 5 different ways that you could structure this. What I would say is everything needs to start with a concept called bucketing, right? So you're creating kind of these pods or these buckets of submissions and review teams. And you can do that a lot of different ways. We have some of our clients that have dedicated quote unquote pods or evaluators per scholarship. So if you're an organization that offers multiple scholarships, that's one way of doing it. Others will do it in combination of phases of review. So they take all of their applications and they go through some type of internal review and vetting process. That's where you can kind of get away with reviewing more than 15, because the idea is more like, how do you create kind of a cutoff line of like, okay, these people should proceed on, versus either A, these people are not eligible. Hopefully we already automated that for you, or B, kind of a quick thumbs up, thumbs down of who should proceed on. And then from there, you have obviously a separate potential team of evaluators using a completely different selection criteria with built-in kind of scorecards to kind of narrow it down to either like an interview phase or a final board selection. So again, breaking it down into phases, or the thing I want to show you, which is called randomization, which is kind of where I lie, which can be done as a way to take all of your applicants and completely randomize who's going to review them, or incorporate the randomization into the phases or into the individual pods. So again, the idea is to create a bucket that's full of two things. One is your applicants and the other is the potential review team. And then within that bucket, kind of bifurcate it down to ensure that the review team is only looking at a certain number. The other thing that we want to look at here, and I'm going to kind of show you this here as well, is the redaction of data. At the end of the day, if we have to ask, or if we are wondering, hey, is this considered personal identifying information, or should this be shown to the review team? The answer is probably yes, it probably is. Err on the side of caution. Typically what you want to do is any personal identifying information, so name, address, email, parent information, as well as things like demographics, race, and ethnicity, should be redacted and not shown to the review committee. On top of that, if you're collecting a bunch of record keeping information, so in our example we had earlier on, like the eligibility stuff, like the review team doesn't need to see that. So again, the idea is to kind of keep your review team very focused on the task at hand and not overwhelm them. And then the third piece, which is going to be its own slide, which is going to be called kind of quantitative metric review, which is using built-in score sheets. So with all that said, how do you create these review workflows, obviously in a platform like Reviewer, or just kind of bigger picture, like visualizing that theory I just talked about? So In this example, we actually have kind of five buckets. We have multiple phases of review. So we have a phase one, phase two, phase three, and then we advance people onto both interviews and then a final selection. Again, I've also seen this done by committees or by different scholarships, but at least that concept itself is very easy to visualize. So you create a bucket, and in this case, we're going to call our bucket phase three review. We're going to make an assumption, right, that all of the phase three applicants are in that bucket. The next step is to assign that bucket out to a team. So whenever Simon, Paula, and Mark come into reviewer, they're only going to see the applicants in the bucket that they've been given access to. So it's a way for you to kind of create, again, kind of privacy control around which review members are going to be reviewing what applicants. Now, if you go back to my first example, though, what if this was phase one and I'm going to make up a number, 100 submissions and a 5-person review team? Again, you can't ask somebody to review 100 submissions. So what you can actually do here is you can open your bucket up and it shows you a list of all of your scholarship applicants, and then B, a list of the potential review team. So what you can do here is kind of two things or in conjunction of two. You could say, you know what, let's bulk select all of my applicants, and I want to make sure that each one gets reviewed exactly 3 times, no more, no less. That way it's completely fair. On the flip side of things, you could also say, but at the same time, I want to make sure that my review committee isn't looking at more than 15 or 20 submissions apiece. And then the system will actually take all of your applicants and then automatically, randomly, and equally distribute them out to your team, assuming that the math adds up. If it doesn't add up, it'll tell you. That way you're not even like manually doing anything. The system just says, hey, let's auto distribute it. Now, with that said, if there's a conflict of interest or if one of your review committee members drops out, you have to like kind of recuse them. You can actually modify this. So again, in this example, I have 3 submissions per evaluator. I could click edit. And then, so in this example, I have Mark. Mark is one of my evaluators. It shows me the 4 submissions Mark is in charge of reviewing. So if I wanted to unassign somebody or reassign it back out, or if I wanted to just have completely manual control over which scholarship applicants are going to go to who, I just use these check marks. So whenever Mark logs in, Mark will see Gabrielle, Leslie, Richard, and Sheldon. So really, it looks simple in the case of just, a bunch of check boxes and typing in numbers. But it's really complex in the sense that we're creating these automation review buckets that, A, ensure compliance, and then B, making it a way for you to kind of ensure that the proper team members are reviewing the proper submissions. So I mentioned the redaction of data. I'm going to show you that as well. The last thing I want to look at is great. We have this really well-structured submission form. So we know that all of our scholarship applicants kind of are being represented in a way that makes sense, right? We're confident that we have the information that we need about them to make review decisions. We've gone through a process of taking your scholarship applications and divvying it out to your team for review. Now it's time for them to come in and actually conduct a selection. So I would say that most scholarship organizations will have some type of deliberation process, which makes total sense, right? Sometimes the data doesn't tell a whole story. And so you want your team to kind of deliberate, talk, and kind of collaborate and figure out who they deem as the most qualified applicants. With that said, we should still be leveraging data to make informed decisions off of it. So I personally like to see what I call score sheets. So it's a way for your review team to kind of mathematically assign point values to the applicants, build out these leaderboards, which in return will power your deliberation meetings. So how do you structure a scorecard? So I would do kind of 2 things. Number one is your scorecards, your review process has to flow with the submission form. So if you go back to our example earlier on, as far as like the content we're collecting within the application form, if I go back here a couple slides, I would have a section on my scorecard for personal information, one for honors and achievements, one for financial need, one for their essay, right? And so the review team just kind of goes through the application form and then side by side offers their notes, their feedback, and their scores that pairs up one-to-one. That way they're not hopping all over the place. It's a very kind of guided, structured approach. It creates consistency amongst your review team to ensure that every single evaluator kind of has the same agenda and the same kind of process. Number 2 is I would probably rethink how you have your scorecards. So a lot of times when we hear scorecard, we think numbers and math, which we totally do. The challenge, however, is most scorecards are saying, hey, rank this person's essay on a scale from 1 to 20. And a lot of times your review team gets really bogged down in numbers. Like, what's the difference between a 16 and a 17? So instead, again, the idea is to lower the barrier for the review team is try to entice an emotional response out of them. So maybe instead of saying score this candidate on a scale from 1 to 20, you say rank their essay from below average to great. And behind the scenes, there's still point values that are associated with their emotional response. But the review team is simply reading through a series of questions, almost like a reference or as an applicant. And they're just kind of answering the questions as they go with their emotional gut feelings and then leveraging the math behind the scenes. So in this example, I'm going to show you they're not doing that, but that's how I would personally structure it. With that said, if you have a lower point scale, so if you have like 6 or 7 questions on a scale from 1 to 5, that's fine. There's enough of a kind of breakup period there where it's not going to be too challenging for the review team. The last thing that I want to kind of allude to, and I will show this to you, is if you are doing a random review, I'm going to kind of pause here because this is a critical component. I told you that, in my personal opinion, randomly assigning submissions to the review team is the proper way of doing things. With that said, it does pose a significant challenge, and that is every applicant is now no longer being reviewed by everybody. So what happens is if you have certain review team members or evaluators that on average score higher or lower than others, how do you not penalize or reward an applicant who just was assigned to one of those individuals? How do you normalize those results? So let's look at that. So in reviewer, again, we've already kind of paired up all of our applicants with review committees. The next piece to this puzzle is to conduct the review. So the review team comes into the system and they too get a menu. They see a listing, right, of all of the scholarship applicants that you want them to score. Now, again, in this example, it does show who they are. If you are redacting any information, you can hide their name. So they just see an ID number. From here, they click on their name and they open up their profile. Now, again, the name of the game is we have to lower the barrier. These are life-changing opportunities. We need to make sure that they're being treated as such. So the idea here is that your review team will have a side-by-side. The left-hand side of the page is the applicant's quote-unquote profile, and then the right-hand side is your score sheet. So again, in this example, we can redact information. So obviously the student's name was removed. If I scroll through here, here's kind of all of their academic needs. If I keep going through here, you're going to see that they're going to be able to answer questions around like their financial needs. However, all of the FAFSA information, the IRS 1040, all of that doesn't show up. So the review committee is basically reading through the scholarship application, and then off to the right, independently, because they can kind of scroll each one at the same time, they can start to assign point values. So for example, like, is their financial needs match, kind of what we're looking for? Tell us more about their essay. Again, this scorecard I think works pretty well because it does follow and flow the form. With that said, I personally would actually have questions that go with every single component. So I'd have like from below average to great, rank this applicant on their extracurricular activities. From below average to great, rank them on financial need, right? And then the review team over here just emotionally says great or below average or thumbs up, thumbs down. Now, again, if you do want them to view file uploads at the same time, you physically don't want your review team having to go somewhere, find their file uploads, download them, and export them and come back. Instead, what you want to do is have them click on the attachment section, and then the files will just embed themselves right in Reviewer. References, similar concept, right? So maybe one of your scorecard questions is like, rank the reference. You would then be able to pull up the reference side by side, fill out the score sheet. Now you will notice that in this case, there is a mathematic point value. So the system is doing auto real-time tabulations. What that means is that you and your teams no longer have to worry about spreadsheets and formulas. The system actually kicks out a leaderboard, and it'll show you a listing of every single scholarship applicant, the team or those pods that review them, how they reviewed collectively, individually, total scores, and averages. So many times this is used either A, to pick your recipients, B, it's used to kind of power a deliberation meeting. So your team might pull this up on a Zoom call or in person and say, okay, we're going to give out, 10 scholarships this year. Here's what the rankings look like. Now from there, let's kind of talk about it. And so it's a great way then to take like your top X number of applicants, and at the bottom, you can say I can just advance them from one phase to the next to the next. With that said, though, I do want to kind of call out this number here. So you can see that Mark scored Sheldon at 12. So the first question that I would have is, did Mark just score Sheldon low because it's not a great application? Or B, did Mark basically has never given a higher than a 15. So then that comes into play is okay, well, yes, the score is low in comparison to other judges, but in comparison to overarching Mark's judging tendencies, it's not low. It's actually a very, very good score, but Sheldon's being penalized. So how do you address that? We actually have built-in reporting in Reviewer that will show you on a per applicant basis every single judge that scored them, how they score on a per question basis in your scorecard. What you really care about though is this green section. And you can kind of see here, this is actually real data that's been redacted of an organization that basically asked the question, why is it that anybody who Judge Judy scores never gets a scholarship? Well, the reason why, as you can see here, is Judge Judy on average scores about a 24, but Tony on average scores about a 34. So literally every single applicant that Judge Judy evaluates is scored about 10 points lower than anybody else. That's extremely problematic. So what do? We actually will add in these extra columns. This happens automatically for you. That creates a baseline. So what happens is that if you were scored a 23.875 by Judge Judy, that's now a 1. That means you were scored completely average from that individual judge's own personal standards. If you scored higher than a 23.875, it's going to be higher than a 1. If you scored lower than that, you're scored lower than a 1 because, again, you were scored lower than that judge's average. Now what you're doing is you're taking every single applicant and each individual judge's personal averages and comparing them to one another. So the new results would look something like this. It would say, okay, Bruce is our highest rated scholarship applicant because he collectively scored 1.15 times higher than the cumulative average, whereas Elon has now scored 0.83 times lower than the average. So again, you don't really care about how strict judges are. All you care about is, are they ranking people, above or below their average threshold? So ran a few minutes late. I did give us plenty of time though for question and answer. So with that said, what kind of questions or comments or insights does anybody here have today? It can be about the platform. It can be about the Army Scholarship Foundation's form. It can be about compliance, whatever I can do for you. Again, the beauty of my job and what I do here at Reviewer is obviously, yes, we provide a platform and an online system to power these campaigns. But each of these components, each of these programs is very unique in its own right. So I've seen a lot of really great things, some less great things as well. And so if there's questions that I can answer for you, or if there's relationships or introductions I can make to other organizations, by all means, I'm happy to do so. My end game here is to help you guys be not only as efficient as possible, but also impact as many people as we can in a way that's fair, non-biased, and compliant as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and mute myself for a sip of water. But again, I have the chat pulled up. Any questions I can answer? And again, as I'm waiting for questions to come in, our team will be taking this conversation and we're going to break it into kind of bite-sized pieces. So, kind of a high-level blog of the components that go into a scholarship application, how we would structure review and selections. We're going to include a recording of this. We're also going to give you, again, kind of this interactive tour. So if you want to kind of click through the full application experience, you can. Again, there's a lot of things that we kind of skipped over here today that we didn't talk about. So this interactive tour kind of really does walk you through step by step the entire scholarship workflow. Again, no right or wrong way. There's probably more wrong ways than right ways, but it does a really good job kind of explaining how I would structure it. Yeah, really great question around how this tool can apply to a grant review program. So I want to kind of emphasize that we try to break our webinars into very specific topics. So scholarships, grants, awards. We do multiple webinars every single week. And the reason why we do that is there are some unique instances and components to each of those campaigns, but at its core, they're very, very similar because there's three key characteristics of all of these campaigns. There's a submission experience. Now, again, a grant application versus a scholarship application versus an award program with nominations are going to look very, very different, but there's still an experience of somebody submitting information to you. Operationally, you still have to be able to take in those applications, review the information, assign it out to your teams, communicate with people. And then at the end of the day, somebody's still going to sit down, they're going to look at those applications, they're going to conduct scoring and selection. So within Reviewer, there obviously are dedicated components. I would say the major difference between a grant and a scholarship is typically the post-selection process. So from a grant making perspective, you need to be able to, report back on impact, right? Like if we're distributing grant funds, like are we able to show that it's actually changing lives and impacting people? And so a lot of times grant recipients will come back into Reviewer And then once a year or once a quarter, whatever your metrics are, they submit personal grant reporting templates that can then be used to power dashboards and things like that. That's the major difference. But at the end of the day, the entire submission experience is going to be customizable. So your grant application. So tell us more about the project, the budget, all that kind of fun stuff that's configurable by you guys. Same thing with the selection tool. Clearly, the scorecard we just looked at wouldn't work for a grant. That's totally fine. The premise is still the same. You want to structure your grant review process that kind of maps and corresponds directly with the content being collected within the grant application. You might have multiple phases of grant review. You might be doing kind of a bit more comprehensive process, things like that. I can kind of follow up with some interactive tours of grants that are being powered within Reviewer. But I do want to kind of reiterate that while the content being collected and how you do a review is going to be different, the concept of how the tool is used is actually the exact same. I do kind of need to backpedal a little bit because even with a scholarship program, it is still very common. In this example, it's kind of a one and done, one-time scholarship. We have some scholarship organizations that we work with that are renewable scholarships. So literally once a year for 4 years, the applicants might get additional funds distributed to them, either based off of need and impact or just the next tranche for the next scholastic school year. So in that example, it kind of goes back to like the power of a profile because once the applicant gets reviewed and selected, they get put into their own bucket, right? Called scholarship recipient. And then every single year they would log in and then update their deliverables. So they might update their own personal information. Maybe they moved, maybe their financial needs have changed. They submit updated transcripts and grades, they might, and all that kind of stuff. And then instead of kind of an initial review and selection, now it's almost like a recertification or approval process for the next kind of phase of scholarship funding. So that entire concept still is pretty relevant. Just for everybody on the call today, as well as from a grant making perspective, how that works is basically the applicant would come back into their profile. And again, you can kind of see here, they can upload attachments at any time if you want, of course, allow them to. Their interactions with reviewer will change based off of workflows, right? You can permit people to do different things. The way that I would structure this though is that I would have them come into this section here called supplemental forms. And then what they would do is instead of having an external form submitted about them, so in this case, the reference, I would instead have them click add new. And then a page would then pop up that says, well, what are you trying to add? And you could have it say like grant impact report or social impact report or 2025 scholarship renewal application. And then they actually fill that out directly in Reviewer. And then as soon as they submit it, it'll then show up as a line item here and they'll tell you who submitted it, when it was submitted, and what they submitted. And then when you press the view button, instead of having a reference pull up, you'd have their grant reporting template or their scholarship renewal form. So again, really powerful stuff here because now we have a profile that lives with a person and it's a way for you to collect data ongoing for pretty much a perpetual amount of time. And wrap it up. As always, if there's anything I can ever do for you, if you want to kind of preview Reviewer and how your processes would fit, let me know. If you're more so just information gathering of how, maybe we can offer insights and feedback on kind of your program, I'm happy to do that as well. Whatever we can do for you guys. But again, really appreciate your time and your participation today. Keep an eye out for that follow-up and any, as well as future webinars. So again, looking forward to kind of reconnecting.